Good morning, guys. Good morning, everyone. So before starting today's session, right? So we'll have some quick assessment on the previous day concepts, right? So yesterday I covered application architecture and 2-tier versus 3-tier, and what is a typical 3-tier architecture? What is HTML, CSS, and JavaScript? Right? So shall we have one quick assessment on that? What is meant by an application architecture, Sunil? Sunil, what is meant by application architecture?
Application architecture is like the way how the application end-to-end flow, and it depends on the application layer, database layer, and UI layer. And if we have cloud configuration also, we can how the server is, it is a physical server or a cloud server. So the complete how the data flows, how the user will interact through the UIs, that is known as architecture. 2-tier, 3-tier architecture concept also there, and there are some technologies we can use, what kind of servers, what kind of application servers. So that is all about the application architecture.
Perfect. Thanks, Sunil. Yeah. So application architecture diagram is, it shows you what are the server components and how your request flows, right? So from the moment you send a request in the browser, right, how the request flows through each layer or through each tier, isn't it?
Yes.
Right. So, and each components, how are the connections established between those servers, right? So all this information will be can be gathered from this application architecture diagram. So application architecture is nothing but a pictorial representation of an application's components, software, and connections, right? And how these applications interact with each other to meet the business or user requirements, right? Okay. So what is the difference between a desktop application, or what are the different types of applications first?
Web applications and desktop applications.
Desktop application.
That's it. Mobile applications. How about mobile application?
Yeah,
We also have mobile applications.
Mobile
Yeah,
and
yeah.
tablet also. So the
Right.
next gen.
Right. Yeah. So Maunika, what is meant by a thick client application?
Thick client means it takes directly from the desktop application.
Right. Desktop applications are called as thick client applications. Right. And what are thin clients then?
Thin client means, for example, if we need to open an application, we can go through browser like Chrome or.
Right. So all browser-based applications or web-based applications are called as thin client applications. Right. Clear for everyone?
Yes.
Right? Yes. And what is Sureka? What is HTML?
HTML means hypertext markup language.
Okay. What is it used for?
It is the one of the language to develop the web server.
Web server.
I mean, it is involved in presentation tier.
Right. So it is one of the languages for developing web pages, web application, or web pages. Right.
Yes, sir.
Pages of a web application. Web pages means pages of any web application. Right. And what is CSS used for? This is for Manasa. What is CSS and what is it used for?
CSS is a type of a language. Hello.
Okay.
It is a type of a language. It is a technical used for scripting.
What can you please repeat that? CSS is a type of language.
It is a cascading style feature.
Yes, CSS stands for cascading style sheets.
Cascading style sheet. It is a core technology for developing web pages like scripting, web pages and web applications for building basics of.
Okay, Hari,
Yes, sir.
what is CSS used for?
So like code for building web pages and web applications, along with graphs and scripting.
Along with?
Graphs and scripting. Sorry.
I didn't get a proper answer. Okay, so anyone else?
So can I answer that one?
To style and layout
Sir,
web pages, sir.
So mainly use it for page
pages.
layout format. How to arrange
Design
the
the
elements
layout.
of the
Where the
HTML.
elements located.
Right. So-
Graphic oriented. Graphical.
Right. So they are designed, CSS cascading style sheets will be used to define the layout of the page. What do you mean by layout? For
How to
example, if you
arrange
take
the
this
things.
slide, right? If you take this slide, so in this, so the logo is there on the top, right? There is a share button in yellow color, right? Of course, this will be designed in, this will be defined in HTML language only, colors and all. But layout, when I say layout, right? So the
Way
heading
to
should be here
arrangement.
on the top left, right? So all this is called as layout, like arrangement of the components on a page that is defined in CSS.
CSS.
Right? And what is the purpose of JavaScript? Vinod?
Main is used for client
Vinod,
side
Vinod,
validation.
let him answer. Vinod.
Sir, actually, I'm in leave, sir.
Okay. Siri?
Yes, sir.
What is
Hello?
JavaScript used for?
JavaScript is a language which is used in a presentation tier, sir.
Okay. And there is one main purpose for JavaScript which I explained yesterday.
Clients and scripting.
Coding for
It can
Client.
calculate, manipulate, and validate data given by HTML and CSS.
Right. So I gave one small term for that, one technical term for that. Client side validations.
Validation.
Validation.
Okay. So yesterday I explained these concepts and yeah. So shall we move to the next one? If you don't have any queries, we'll move to the next concept. That is, we'll discuss some HTTP basics and what is meant by request, what is response, and what is request response cycle. Means what happens from the moment. So when you send a request in a browser to the server, so what happens from the moment you send a request till you receive the response? Say for example, you are sending a request to Gmail server here. I type gmail.com, right? So I have sent a HTTP request and I received some response from the browser. Sorry, from the server. Browser received response from the server, right? So now what happens behind the scenes? Like what happens when you, from the moment you send the request till you receive the response, right? That is HTTP request response cycle, right? So I'll try to complete these concepts today. HTTP basics and HTTP request and response and request response cycle. Yeah, I already typed it here. Okay. So let's see if time permits, I'll cover that also. Otherwise, we'll complete this request and response for today. So what is HTTP first of all?
Hypertext Transfer Protocol.
Right. What is meant by protocol?
A set of
Step
rules.
by step process or a set of rules.
Set of instructions for transferring the information between browser and the server.
Right. Not only browser from and server, from and vice versa also, right?
Yes, sir. Two-way conversation.
Right. Perfect. So HTTP stands for Hypertext Transfer Protocol. Right? And yeah. So HTTP stands for Hypertext Transfer Protocol. And what is meant by protocol? Protocol is nothing but communication language between browser and server. That is protocol. And HTTP protocol will be used for communication between web browser and web server and browser. When I say browser, or it is also called as client, right? And it is a stateless. This HTTP protocol is a stateless protocol. Means request doesn't know anything about the previous request. Any request doesn't know anything about the previous request. Those are called as stateless protocols. I'll explain that later. What is meant by stateless, and that we will discuss that later. And what is the standard port of HTTP? It's 80. Standard port number of HTTP is 80. And we have one more protocol called HTTPS, where S stands for secure, right? So HTTP stands for the same Hypertext Transfer Protocol only, and this additional S stands for secure. So if you observe a lot of websites, right? So some websites, when you access some websites, you see a padlock symbol, right? Okay, let me go to this, the same Gmail, right? So you see a padlock symbol, right? Isn't it? So if you click on that, it says, it shows something here, connection is secure, right? So this is a secure connection. Or else whenever you are using Flipkart or Amazon, also you'll see this padlock symbol. Means you can enter your debit card or credit card details without hesitating. That is the whatever details you enter, right? They will be going in a secure connection. Means from your machine to the server, they will be traveling in a secure connection, so that no one will be able to intercept the traffic and hack it. No one will not be able. So obviously we should not enter any debit card or credit card details which doesn't have this padlock symbol, or you don't see this HTTPS. If you don't see HTTPS, right, we should not enter any secure, any confidential information. Here guys. Now, so this is HTTPS protocol. So when you see this padlock symbol, right, that follows a HTTPS protocol, means the communication is secure, right? Now, encrypted HTTP data, how is that achieved? Is encrypted HTTP data, encrypted HTTP data is transferred over a secure connection using SSL or TLS. So wherever you see this padlock symbol, right, you see padlock symbol over here and here, right? WhatsApp also you see here, right? So wherever you see that padlock symbol, those are secure websites, whether you use Amazon or Flipkart. Let me show you those also quickly, right? Isn't it? You see a padlock symbol, that means that website is secure. Or whether you use IRCTC or Redbus, right? All these are secured websites because, you know, they involve some payments. And when you enter some credit card or debit card details, right, no one should be accept that server, right? So no one should be able to intercept the traffic or capture those details in between. Clear, guys? This is about HTTPS, right? And the standard port for HTTPS is 443. And how the security is achieved is encrypted HTTP data is transferred over a secure connection. Means even though you enter your credit card or debit card details, right, those details will be encrypted. Those details will be encrypted, and, you know, they will not get transferred as numbers, as simple numbers, right? But it will be transferred as an encrypted data over a secure connection. And that uses using SSL or TLS. SSL stands for Secure Socket Layer. Let me open up your class notes. That is SSL stands for Secure Socket Layer. And TLS stands for Transport Layer Security. Transport layer security, right? I explained this feature yesterday, right? So you can right click and you can directly do a Google search of any term that you come across, right? Just use this option, explore. and you'll get the Google search results directly. TLS stands for Transport Layer Security. Okay. Next, the standard port that this HTTPS protocol uses 443. And there is one more protocol called FTP, which stands for File Transfer Protocol. And this is the standard network protocol used for transfer of files between a client and server on a computer network. So we are least bothered about this, but just I want to introduce that, what that term, I want to introduce that definition or that term called FTP, which stands for File Transfer Protocol. Okay, so let's understand some basics, HTTP basics now in detail. So HTTP, what is HTTP? We already discussed. It is a communication language between HTTP is a protocol and protocol. What is that protocol? That is a set of rules for use to deliver data on the World Wide Web. So I repeat it one more time. So HTTP is a TCP IP based communication protocol. TCP IP ani?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
What is TCP?
Transfer Control Protocol. Internet.
Transmission Control Protocol. TCP stands for Transmission Control Protocol. Right? And IP stands for Internet Protocol.
Internet.
Okay. Of course, it is showing IP. What protocol is IP? Right. So HTTP is a TCP IP based communication protocol that is used to deliver data. When I say data, it can be HTML files, image files, query results, etc. on the World Wide Web or Internet. World Wide Web is nothing but Internet, right? So it is a communication protocol used to deliver the data, right? Or set of rules for transferring the data. When we say data, data can be a HTML file or image files or query results, etc. What is meant by query results? If you search for some product on Amazon or Flipkart, right? So it returns some query results, the search results, isn't it? If you search for some product on Amazon or Flipkart, right? So this is a query result, isn't it? You see here, you see a query symbol here, question mark here, search, yes. Question mark, right? And this is called as query string. Query string, okay. Whatever is followed after question mark, right? That is called as a query string. And this is called, and again, in this, see, from here to here, this is called as query string. Right? Again, in this query string, this is called as key, this is called as value. Again, you have different key and value pairs. You have different key and value pairs. This is one key and value pair. Okay. And different key and value pairs will be separated by ampersand symbol. So this is the separator. Again, this is a key and this is the value. Again, one more key, one more value. Again, one more key, one more value. Right? Understood, right? This is the whole string is called as a query string. Whatever is there after a question mark from here to here. This is called as query string. Clear? Please speak out and remind me if I forget to record. Okay, if I stop recording. Right? So HTTP communication between clients and servers is done by request and responses. Right? So what is client here? When I say client is nothing but a browser, right? So it sends a HTTP request to the web server, and web server receives the request. Yesterday I explained this. How does your request travel from browser to server and back to the browser? So your browser sends a HTTP request to the server, and it will be received by the web server first. Once it is received by the web server, then the web server process your request and it will send the response. It will understand your request and it will, the web server receives the request and server runs an application to process the request and it returns a response to the browser. The server returns a response to the browser and the browser receives the response. Right? So this is a typical HTTP request response cycle. Browser requests if a browser requests a HTML page, server returns a HTML page. If the browser requests a style sheet, server returns a CSS file. And if browser requests an image, server returns the image JPG file. Right? And if your browser requests JavaScript code, it returns a JS file, JavaScript file. Right? And if the browser requests data, the server returns data in the form of XML or JSON. Server returns data in the form of XML or JSON. both these XML and JSON are used to store and transport data. Now, the next important concept that you need to know is what is the difference between XML and JSON. All right, I'll explain that soon. I'll cover that soon in the next slide. Or let me, anyone like who is already working, can anyone answer this? What is the difference between XML and JSON? Yes, anyone? Right. Okay, let me explain. So both XML and JSON are used for storing and transporting data. However, what the main difference between XML and JSON is a lightweight format, right? Than XML compared to XML. So XML is obsolete now. Means XML, no one is using XML now, but everyone is using JSON because JSON is a lightweight format, right? And nowadays we have like smartphones and which are having limited bandwidth, right? So because of to support these mobile browsers and all, JSON is the best technology to support that because JSON is a lightweight format. So you will understand what is lightweight format and how does it support a mobile communication protocol or mobile devices. You will learn soon in the coming up sessions. Okay, I will explain in detail what is the difference between XML and JSON. I'll give you some examples like when I cover that. See here you can see this is the difference between XML and JSON. I'll explain that when we go to that slide. Okay, so for now remember that for storing and transporting data over internet, both XML and JSON can be used, right? So however, XML is becoming obsolete, means it is outdated and everyone is using JSON now. That's all you need to remember for now, right? Shall we move on to the next slide? Are any queries here? Can I take your silence as no?
Yes, sir.
Please respond, guys. Like sometimes what happens is if there is some internet issue, I may not be audible to you, right? Please respond. So the next things, basics that you need to know is CSS. What is CSS, JavaScript, and XML and JSON, right? CSS and JavaScript I explained already in the yesterday's session, previous session. Now let's understand what is meant by XML. So XML stands for Extensible Markup Language, right? And it was designed to store and transport data. XML. So you need not know how to write an XML code, or you need not know how to write JSON code. Okay, nothing to worry about that. So, but you should know you should know some basic concepts like what is XML, what is JSON, right? That's what I am covering now. So XML stands for Extensible Markup Language. Don't worry, like, you need not know JavaScript, or you need not know how to write a CSS, how to write a style sheet, right? You need not know all those details, but you should know like at least some basics about those. Okay, and XML stands for Extensible Markup Language. XML was designed to store and transport data, right? And JSON, it stands for JavaScript Object Notation. Please remember these definitions at least. Okay, full forms. You have to remember these full forms. JSON stands for JavaScript Object Notation. It is also designed for storing and transport data. However, it is a lightweight format. Just now I mentioned, right? JSON is lightweight format. JSON is often used when data is sent from a server to a web page, right? And JSON is self-describing and easy to understand. Okay, so you'll soon understand like what is this self-describing and easy to understand, right? Are we clear on this? What is the full form of XML and JSON, and what is the purpose of both of them?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Storing, for both are used to store and transport data over internet. Okay, now let's understand the difference between XML and JSON. So if you observe here, both JSON and XML can be used to receive data from a web server, right? And I gave some examples here. If you observe here, this is the information of 3 employees, first name and last name of 3 employees. And if that information, suppose you asked for information of 3 employees, right? Or information of all the employees in an organization, and server should tell you that, pass that information. Server should send that information to you, right? If it uses XML, right, this is how it looks like. This is how that information will be sent. the code, XML code will be looking like this, right? And see, in both these examples, server is sending information about 3 employees, just 3 employees. But if it uses XML, this is how the code looks like. And if the server uses JSON to send the data, this is how it looks like. And how many lines? Observe here, XML, if it uses XML, it has 3 lines for each employee details, and 3 into 3, 9, plus employees opening tag. This is opening tag of employees, and this is closing tag, right? Closing tag will have a hash symbol, forward slash. This is opening tag, this is closing tag. Okay, so, and if that information of 3 employees should be passed in the form of XML, it will be around 11 lines, right? These are 11 lines, right? But if the same information should be sent, if they are using JSON to send the data, it will be hardly 5 lines like this. Now you understood what is lightweight format?
Yes, sir. The coding will be limited.
Right. The lines of code or the amount of data will be less when you use JSON. So that is the main difference between XML and JSON. And JSON is a lightweight format. Are we clear on this now? What is the difference between XML and JSON? Very important interview question, also very important concept.
Yes, sir.
Why XML has become obsolete, outdated, and why JSON, why nowadays all web applications are using JSON is being used for web applications or mobile applications.
Sir,
Yeah.
sir, JSON and XML are related to database or something, sir?
No, for storing, for transporting data over internet, these are used.
Okay, sir.
Not for database. Not
Sir,
for
how
storing.
can we know that whether that internet is giving response through XML or JSON? How can we know, sir? In
Okay.
which response it is giving?
Right, good question. Yeah, let me show you some website. Okay, there is one website called advantageonlineshopping.com, which uses JSON. This is a modern application. If you see right click and view source, right, you can see some. I remember that we saw some JSON response over here. Let me confirm. So this is all HTML code. Okay, hold on. So let me log into the application. You can right click on the page and you can see the JSON code actually. So if you see these tags, right, these kind of tags, right, if your data contains, if you see this curly brace, we call this as curly brace. Okay. So if you see this curly brace, that means that the response that is being sent in the form of JSON, that confirms that they are using JSON for sending the response. I remember that I saw that response somewhere on this side. I'm just trying to show that. Okay, once we go into scripting, I'll show you that. You will see that definitely you'll come across it. I don't remember exactly at what page we are getting that. 1 second, let me try. Check out. So this is all HTML code, isn't it? So this is all HTML code. You see here, right? HTML language is equal to EN, means English. Language is equal to English. And observe here, this is the opening tag, opening HTML tag, and closing tag will have this slash. Right? See, this is the opening tag for head, means head of this page. Okay. So, and this is the opening tag, and this is body of the page. You see here, right? Body. This is body of the page. You will see some pages which are completely designed using JSON. I'll show that. Okay, once we go to scripting. I'll
Okay,
show.
sir. Okay, sir. It's okay, sir.
So now let's understand like what is request response cycle. So what happens from the moment you send a request till you receive a response. Okay.
Okay.
So I will explain this over here, and I want to explain this HTTP response codes also. Right? So I'll cover this HTTP response codes also. Before that, I will let me explain what is request response cycle. What is meant by request response cycle? One of the important entry questions for like particularly for below 5 years experience guys. Okay, of course, like one guy asked me this question in when I am attending interview with 12 plus. Okay, there is no rule that you should not ask for experienced guys, more experienced guys. Okay, so I myself faced this interview question in one of the interviews when I am attending with 12 plus years experience. Immediately I added this slide to this. Okay, so I thought like, okay, interviewer can ask anything, obviously, right? It's their wish, they can ask anything. So let's understand what happens from the moment you send a request from the browser to server until you receive the response, right? So there are 5 steps involved in this called local processing, right? And resolving the IP address, establishing a TCP connection, and sending a HTTP request, and browser receives response. Let's understand one by one. Okay, the first one is local processing, means browser does some processing inside itself, right? What does the browser do is once you type the URL, right, browser extracts the protocol, right? What is protocol here? What are the protocols that we have seen just now?
TCP and
HTTP and HTTPS, right? These are protocols, right? And FTP. We have 3 examples for protocols, right? HTTP, HTTPS, and FTP, right? So browser extracts the protocol, means once you type some URL in the browser, right, it will break that request into these parts, right? Like protocol, what is the server name, and what is the port number, what is the resource path, and query string, right? It will break that request into these 3 parts. Let me give some examples now. Suppose you type IRCTC, let me type IRCTC and let me show you that. Okay? So I am typing IRCTC, or else you can also do Google search, right? So I'll show you that you follow the method that you follow. So generally, like you will be searching like this. Some of you will be searching like this, right? And you will be clicking on this. So you are sending a request here to IRCTC server. HTTP, you are sending a HTTPS request, isn't it? Observe here, this is your server name, IRC, and see the URL. This is the complete URL. So that's what I kept here. This is the URL that I kept here in the slides for your understanding, isn't it? Of course, it is still nget only, nget and such. Yeah. So observe here, this is the protocol in this URL. HTTPS is the protocol, and server name I gave color coding. Observe here, so that you will understand what is server name in this, what is protocol, and what is meant by resource path. That is the reason I gave color coding here and here. Did you observe that? Understood what I mean to say?
Yes,
right? And server name is irctc.co.in. That is the server name. And port number is optional. Here we don't have a port number, but because port number is optional. And what is meant by resource path? Resource path means where this page is there. That is meant by resource path. nget/train search. This part is called as resource path in this request. Okay, you will understand what is meant by resource path clearly with some example. When you install some sample application, I will explain that one more time. All right. This is one more application. This is one more URL, right? And observe here, this URL has a port number of 1080. Now let's understand what is meant by port number. Okay, what is meant by this port number? So this is a software port. This is not a hardware port on your computer, but this is a software port. And whatever server you are sending request, right, it will be listening on a particular port number on a computer. A computer like any server will have thousands of port numbers, and each application will be running on a port number. Or each application will be listening on a port number for any incoming requests. Okay, I'll explain what is this port number when I cover this sample application called web tours. I'll explain that later on. Okay, but for now, understand that this is called as port number. Okay, and suppose you type amazon.in, so that contains only protocol and server name, right? So whatever URL you type in the browser, right, first browser will extract the different parts of the request into, or that will break into these parts, like it will understand what is protocol, what is the server name here, what is the resource path, port number, and all this information, right? Now next thing is like it will resolve the IP address of the server. Okay, now what is meant by IP address? IP stands for first internet protocol, and every server or every machine connected to the internet will have something called IP address. Okay, every server or every computer will have some IP address. Okay, so first let me show you the IP address of my machine. So suppose how to check the IP address? Any guess? How to check the IP address? Right. So use ipconfig. Use a command called ipconfig, and you will get a lot of details over here. And this is the IP address of my machine. And again in IP address there are two things called public IP and private IP. There are two things called private IP and public IP. This is my private IP address. Means this is internal to my network. Okay, let's say I'll give some example for this. Okay, suppose you are staying in some apartment, right? So if one of your neighbor asks you where do you stay, right? If one of your neighbor asks you, your apartment, neighbor from the same apartment asks you, where do you stay? What do you tell? You tell what is
Flat number. Flat number.
Right. But suppose if some outsider asks you, where do you stay?
Apartment name with
We'll say this.
location and
We'll
the
say just.
Correct. Right. So the same way, suppose if neighbor, so this is private IP, means this is within the network. Within our network means within my local network. This IP address helps me to identify this machine within the network. But there will be something called public IP also. Okay, let me quickly show you that how to check the public IP of public IP. Okay, so just open a browser and type whatismyip.com. Can everyone please do this? Whatismyip.com. Go to this URL or type in the browser whatismyip.com. Please do this, everyone, and bookmark this, guys. Everyone did that? And this is public, this is my public IP. Okay, you see here, right? My public IP v4 is IPv4 means version 4. My public IP v4 is 103.140.231.38. That is my public IP, right? So this is something like your build apartment name or something like that. Okay, so if an outsider asks you, if someone who is not your neighbor, or if some outsider asks you where do you stay, then you tell your apartment name and area and all those, right? The same way, this is the means that is to the external world. But if your neighbor asks like, well, if your neighbor asks you like where do you stay, you will not say like I stay in so and so apartment. You will not say apartment name and all, right? Because he also stay in the same apartment. If he stays in the same apartment, right? You will simply say this is my flat number. I stay in so and so flat number or so and so floor, isn't it? So this is something internal to your network. Clear, guys? And observe here, if you have two computers or one computer and mobile phone connected, right? Every device will have a unique IP address. Suppose there is you connect your mobile to your Wi-Fi. In that case, your mobile device or mobile phone also will have some IP address. That is private IP. Yeah, private IP communicate within the network. Public IP communicate outside the network. Yes. Understood, right? What is meant by private IP and public IP? And observe here, see here, it is showing my location also, my IP location. Right? Nanakram Guda, TG for Telangana, IN for, this is the state code and country code. And this is the ISP. What is meant by ISP?
Internet service provider.
Internet service provider, right? So that means so you have Act FiberNet and BSNL broadband, Airtel FiberNet and all these, right? That in that way I'm using Zoom Fiber Solutions. This is the IP ISP for me, Internet Service Provider for me. And this is my public IP. Is it clear? Everyone clear on what is meant by public IP and private IP?
Yes, sir. Yes,
Right?
sir.
So in that way, so these servers also will have some IP, that Amazon.in or Apple.com, all these, you know, these websites also will have some IP. And now how to find out IP address of those servers is, right? So just type ping. Suppose I want to see what is the IP address of Apple website. Type ping apple.com. And this is the IP address of Apple servers. You see here, right? Pinging apple.com. And you got some response from that server. So this is the IP address of Apple servers, right? Apple website, right? Or Apple servers. Now suppose if I ping flipkart.com. So this has a different IP address, right? You see some different IP address, 163.53.78.110, isn't it? So in that way, browser also will get the IP address. It will find out what is the IP address. So when we have this server name, why do we need the IP address? Isn't it? When we have the server name, right? So this is server name. So let me relate to this some real-time example. So this server name is something like your apartment name, and IP address is something like your plot number. Okay. Every website will have, or every server or every website will have some unique IP address, right? So then next thing is, once it breaks that request, right, it has to find out what is the IP address of the server. For that, for finding out, browser to find out that IP address, it will look through its own cache of recently requested URLs. To find out IP address of the server, right? First, it will look into its own cache of recently requested URLs. Now we came across one new term called cache, right? Cache. Some people pronounce it as cache and some people pronounce it as cache. Basically, this is a browser cache. Now let's understand what is meant by browser cache. Suppose you access any website for that matter. The first time you access the website, right? It will be, if you observe, it will be a bit slow, isn't it? But suppose after 5 minutes or 10 minutes, if you access the same page, it will be loading faster. Did anyone of you observe that? Suppose you type apple.com for the, okay, let me use this. You type apple.com, right? So there are a lot of images. That's why I'm selecting that. There are a lot of high resolution pics here. You can use Flipkart or Amazon also for these examples, because all these websites will have a lot of images, right? A lot of high resolution images. And if you see, this will have more high resolution images. That's the reason I'm selecting this. Okay, that's it. I'm not promoting Apple or anything. Okay, right? The first time you access the website, right? So it will take some time. It may, so how much time it took? It took some around like 2 seconds or so. Next time you access the same website, right? So it will be loading faster. Did you observe that any time?
No, sir.
You haven't observed that? Observe that next time, right? First time you access any website, right? It will be loading slower, but the next time onwards, like it will be faster, right? Unless until you clear the browser cache, unless until you clear the browsing history. Clear, guys?
Yes,
Now,
yes.
how is it possible is, there are some images and all HTML files, right? Any page consists of HTML page, CSS files, JavaScript files, and some images, right? These are the web page components, right? What is meant by web page components? Let me go to your notes.
Buttons, all these comes under HTML.
Web page components. Components means, what is the general meaning of components?
Parts.
Parts, right? So here web page component means what are the parts of different parts of the page. So any web page will be made up of some HTML pages, isn't it? HTML pages, or let me name HTML page, sorry, and CSS files, JavaScript files, and all this, right? JavaScript files, images, isn't it? And again, the images will be different. We have different formats in images. PNG format, JPG, and all this. Right? These are the different image formats. Right? You can see here, you can right click and view source and see here. You can search here. Let's see that. So HTML, you have seen that here. Let's search for CSS. You see some CSS files, isn't it? You see some CSS files here. Again, let's search for some JavaScript. I'm using Control F, by the way. Control F, and I'm searching and typing it here. Okay, see here. I'm typing it here and searching and click enter. So it will show you what are the JavaScript files in this page. You see here require.js. There are 3 occurrences. Let's see the other occurrences. Right? This is one more analytics.js. Isn't it? So this page contains some CSS files, HTML files, and JavaScript files, and some images also. Let's search for PNG. See, you see here, there is some logo.png, isn't it? And let's search for JPG if there are any JPG. See here, there are some images in JPG format, isn't it? So these are called as web page components, parts of any web page. What are the other different formats? BMP, right? Bitmap. BMP stands for bitmap. You need not know, of course, you need not know those two forms and all, okay? But just know that, remember, these are the different image formats. That's enough. That good enough. All right. So, yeah. So what your browser does is the first time you access any website, right? It will store all those images and JavaScript files and all these into browser cache. Browser cache, right? And next time if you access the same page, if you suppose if you close this page and next time, after some time you again revisit the page, right? Now it will load from the browser cache. Understood or no?
Like every time we are doing
how can we check that? Okay. Yes, someone is asking something.
Yeah, it's Ramesh. Every time we are doing performance testing, we need to clear the caches, right, to get the correct results.
When we are doing performance testing, we will not use a browser anyways. But if you are, if you are using any tool, right, each tool will have some option to simulate a real browser. We'll discuss that going forward. Okay.
And one more point, you are saying that you are getting one IP for apple.com or flipkart.com. It is always same IP. Maybe it is changing because of load balancing. They are using many servers, I guess.
Yeah, correct. They will be having many servers. Yeah. And I'm not sure whether we will get the same IP address every time. I didn't observe that. Good point. I'll note this down. Okay. So I'll check that. I'm not sure on this whether we get a okay. Let me try the command, same command one more time. I think this is the public IP. This is the public IP and that remains same. That's what I believe.
So you can access using this IP from the browser.
What is that?
Like using this IP, we can access Flipkart site.
Yes, you can, I think.
Yes, we should be able to. Yes. Got it, right? It is redirecting to the server name, isn't it? I think this is public IP only, whatever we are seeing into the browser. Okay, that should be public IP. And generally it will be, I believe it is static. I believe it doesn't change every time. Okay. Next. So coming back to this concept. So once you access any page, right, again, if you close the browser, right, and again, if you open the try to access the same page again, it will load it from the browser cache, right? So initially the first time you access the page, it will store these images, JavaScript files, CSS files in the something called browser cache, and it will load from the cache, right? And how to check that, right? So there is a way to check that. Okay, let me show you. So if you launch developer tools, right? The first time, if you let me do a refresh. Okay, let me do a refresh. Actually, it should show here disk cache or cache something. One second. I'm not sure why it is not showing now. Let me take some standard websites. Let me clear this developer tool. Clear. Suppose if I access the same page again, so let me click OK. And let me do a refresh. Let me send the request again. Yeah. So see here. So see here. Some resources are fetched from the cache. See here. You see here, right? This is memory cache, server memory cache. Server. What is this? One second. Server from memory cache. Okay, I'll show that at some other point. Okay, I'll show it some other application. All right. So once we'll install some demo application on our machine, and I'll show that at that time. So how can we identify whether it is fetching from the server or whether it is fetching from the browser cache? Close this tab.
Sir, in the upside option, there is a disable cache. You can enable that, right?
Oh yeah, correct. Disable cache. Yes, this is because of this. Yes, I'm not sure why this was selected, but by default, you will have this unchecked. Okay, let me show you now. Let me clear this. Yeah, now see here, it is fetching something from cache. You see here, right? Some pages, some components are fetched from the cache. You see here, right? Memory cache. You see disk cache, right? Isn't it? Here, guys.
Yes, sir.
Thanks for that. Who is that?
Yes, Karishma, sir.
Karishma. Yeah, I didn't notice that. Yeah, thanks for that. Okay, so you understood, right? So when the first time you access any website, right? So your browser will store some components or some files into the cache, and the next time you access the same page, it will get it from that cache, right? So this is about the cache that we came across here. Now, first, in the same way, whenever you are, accessing any website, so it will try to resolve the IP address. It will try to find out what is the IP address. Okay. So in this process, right, to find out IP address, first it will look into its own cache of recently requested URLs. Means it will check whether you access the same website recently. If you access the same website recently, it should have done this whole process, right? So it will try to get the IP address from the cache. If it is not found there, suppose you clear the browsing history. For example, you can clear once in a while, like we clear the browsing history, right? So you can go to history and clear the browsing history, isn't it? So more tools, you will have that in more tools, clear browsing data. For example, if your browser is slow or something, right? We generally do this, like we clear the browsing data, isn't it? Right? So unless until you clear the browsing data, right, it will be stored in the browser cache. So if it could not find the IP address of that, like then it will look into operating system cache, right? It will look into the operating system cache. Your operating system also will maintain some cache and it will look into that cache. What is the purpose of this? It is trying to find out what is the IP address of that website that you are trying to access. Then it will look into router cache and then DNS cache. Router cache is nothing but your router means like your Wi-Fi router, right? And then DNS cache. DNS stands for domain name system. Domain name system or domain name server. Okay. So it will look into the DNS cache. So what is this DNS means? What is this DNS server means? Okay. Just right click and explore DNS. So DNS servers maintain the your server name and what is the IP address of that server. Right? This domain name system, that is a phone book, kind of phone book of the internet. Okay. So read this, you will understand what is DNS. So from your side, what you have to do is whenever you come across some new terms like this, just explore and learn more about those concepts. Suppose today we came across DNS. Explore what is DNS.
It converts number based to, I think, text based to number based, sir.
Correct. Yes. So DNS system helps. It acts as a phone book for the internet. It will convert that server names to IP address. You can see here DNS translates domain names to IP addresses, so browsers can load internet resources. Clear case? What is meant by domain name? Domain name is nothing but your server name. For example, this is your domain name. Redbus.in, this is called as domain name, right? So here flipkart.com, this is the domain name. So what does this DNS does? It will translate that server address into IP address. That's what we understood here, right? Clear, guys? It translates the domain names into IP addresses. Each device connected to internet has a unique IP address with which other machines use to find the device. Just now I mentioned, right? Each machine connected to the internet will have a unique IP address, right? So with which it identifies that other machines can identify that device. Okay. Are we good here? What is DNS? What is operating system cache? And what is browser cache? Is it clear, guys? Is this statement clear? So, and if cache lookup fails means if the IP address is not found in either of these operating system cache or browser cache or router cache or DNS cache, then browser will fire off a DNS request. Means browser sends a request to the DNS system or DNS server, and DNS server sends the IP address to the browser. Returns the IP address of that website that you are trying to access. Now, once it resolves the IP address, then it will establish a TCP connection, and that is called as TCP handshake. Establishing a TCP connection, so is called as TCP handshake. And once the client has an IP address, it will open a TCP connection over which it has to send a HTTP request. So this is how your internet works. Okay. So if you read OSI communication, so if you remember those concepts, right, you'll have all these concepts covered there. What is TCP connection? Why should we have what are the different layers of OSI, right? And what is TCP connection? What is right? What is HTTP, right? So you'll get all this terminology, like you might have read this in your academics. If you are from, like if you have these computer networks, or if you are from a computer background. Okay. So this is called as establishing a TCP connection is called as TCP handshake. And what is the purpose of HTTP connection? If your browser want to communicate to the server, it must open a TCP connection and send a HTTP request on that connection. Right? So once it's so HTTP request, right? Again, that request can be a GET request or a POST or PUT or DELETE or a PATCH request. That request can be a GET request or a POST request or PUT or PATCH or DELETE. These are simple terms to understand. I will explain each of these. What is a GET request? What is POST request in one of the next sessions? Right? Pratyusha is browsing and pasting it here. Okay, what is meant by TCP handshake? Good, Pratyusha. Right? So once it establishes, browser establishes a connection to the server, then it will send a HTTP request, and that request can be, these are the different types of HTTP requests: GET, POST, PUT, DELETE, PATCH. So I'll give some examples, okay, and I'll show you like how to see this. Did I cover developer tools for your batch? No.
No, sir.
Did I cover this developer tools? Okay, let me quickly explain how to see the request type, what type of request it is. Suppose you type apple.com, right? And see this. See, this is the URL that I typed here, right? So, and you see here the request method is a GET request, isn't it? Right? And if you log into the application, for example, there is we can log into Gmail or any other IRCTC or any application, that will be a POST request. And I will explain what is the difference between a GET and POST request. Very important interview question. I will explain that in the session. What is the difference between a GET request and a POST request? I will cover in one session, and then we will start scripting. Okay. For now, remember that. So what is the meaning of GET request? Right? We are sending a GET request to apple.com. Means we are asking Apple server to get this page for me. Which page? This apple.com page. As simple as that. Right? We are sending a GET request, means we are asking the server, Apple server, to get this page for me. That's it. There is nothing, no rocket science here. Understood, guys? And if you are logging into the application, right, it will be getting passed as a POST request. We'll discuss why do we need a POST request over there when we log in and all, right? And how, developer will be basically defining this, like which request should be sent as a GET request and which request should be sent as a POST request. Okay, so we'll discuss like what are the differences and when each request type will be used in the coming up sessions, next session probably. So once it establishes a connection, right, the browser will send a request, HTTP request, and your server will process that request and it will send the response to the browser, and browser will show the response as a web page, right? Browser receives the response and renders the page as the response. So this is what happens behind the scenes, like from the moment you send a request to the server till you receive the response. This is what happens behind the scenes. And this is called as HTTP request response cycle. Is everyone clear on this page? I muted everyone because there is some background noise. So if you want to speak, right, if you want to temporarily unmute, press and hold the space bar on your keyboard and then release it. Okay. I will stop it here, guys, for today. So tomorrow, in the tomorrow session, we will discuss like what is GET method, we'll discuss different request methods, HTTP request methods. So from your side, what you have to do is like those who are from non-computers background or those who are, explore what is DNS, what is operating system cache, browser cache, what is TCP connection, right? Please explore this by just, you can simply right click here and explore. Otherwise, you can go do a Google search and explore more on this. All right. So we'll continue tomorrow, same time from 8:30 to 9:30. Right. And tomorrow I am going to explain what are the different HTTP request methods and what is the difference between them. So for tomorrow's session, these would be the topics. Let me pause recording.